Hello, my name is Max Broad. I'm the Executive Director of DC Voters for Animals. I'm excited to welcome you to this discussion on the DC 2024 elections and how the candidates are looking in their responses to the candidate questionnaire that we sent out from DC Voters for Animals to learn about what each person's priorities are for animals as they strive to become the next elected leader in DC. So I'm excited to share with you the responses today and hear a little bit from the community about what our priorities are. So first off, DC Voters for Animals. We are an organization that coalesces the voice of the animal voter to do two things. We want to lift up the policies and the politicians doing the most for animals. So policies being the laws that we're creating in the district to protect animals and create new considerations as we spread our compassion and our net and circles of compassion broader and wider. And then the politicians who are doing the most good. We want to be able to support them and be wind in their sails as they try and help out animals. We also advocate for all animals, whether that's companion animals, such as our dogs and cats, animals in farms and labs, and wildlife. That's a little bit about DC Voters for Animals. You can check us out on our new website at dcvfa.com. The purpose of today is to do orientation to the races and the candidates, so you have an idea of what the elections look like and who the people are running in the elections. We want to share how the candidates responded to their questionnaires, so you can know how they're relating to animal issues. And then finally, we want to collect input from the public and feedback from our DCVFA members and supporters. So definitely welcome comment. And we not only do we have sessions today, we have an in-person session March 6th, and that'll be at the pop-up 73 farm in downtown. And then we're also excited to, we'll also have an open written feedback form that you can submit your comments in, and we'll post that in the notes. So let's just talk about a little about the elections. So this is all leading up to the June 4th DC primary. As you probably know, in DC, with such a heavily Democratic city, the candidate who typically wins a primary is also the candidate who wins the general election. So it's very important that the primary election is the most important election in DC for most of the races. For this primary election, we're looking at the races in wards 2, 4, 7, and 8. You can see those highlighted in the map, and you may live in one of those circled wards, and if so, your candidate, your ward is electing a politician this year, and everybody in DC will be electing at-large candidates. We have 2 at-large. The first will be the Democratic at-large, and then later on will be another independent or another party at-large, and that'll be for the general election. So the important thing to remember for the at-large race is there's 2 seats. One of whom is the Democratic seat is really important for the June election, and the other seat, which is a non-Democratic seat, as decided in our home rule charter for DC that Congress created back in the 60s or 70s, is that that a second seat will come up and that race will be more relevant to the general election. So let's jump into what the candidate questionnaire even entails. And this is a series of questions we assembled with input from experts on animal issues, as well as input from the general community of DC Voters for Animals. Really thank you everybody who weighed in and offered your input and editing and insights. Is really great. We sent it out to the candidates on February 9th and gave them until February 28th to respond. And so we asked them 6 main policy questions. One relating to prohibiting the sale of fur, which there is a standing bill in DC Council right now under consideration. We asked a bill about lifting restrictions on pets in housing. These are restrictions that often make it difficult for people to live with their pets and can have some real issues around housing access. We asked a question around products prohibiting products made from force feeding. So that's essentially foie gras and products that are made by essentially sticking a pipe down an animal's throat and inserting food until they're stomach is full. We asked a question around having an animal welfare liaison in the mayor's office, one around extreme confinement for farm animals, like what we've seen in California and Massachusetts, prohibiting the sale of products that come from animals in just like very tight, tiny spaces, extremely inhumane. And then lastly, we asked a question about National Park Service and pushing them forward to find a humane solution for dealing with the deer population instead of shooting the deer, using contraceptives, using vaccines that prevent the deers from repopulating rather than shooting them. So these are our main questions. We also asked them open-ended questions about what their priority of these or other animal issues would be, and then about any special animals in the candidate's life. So let's just give you an overview of the responses. First off, you want to notice some trends, not just of who supports these issues. It's always easy to say you support something, right? But also who does not. And you'll notice that there's some candidates who don't support some of these issues, and you can read further into why in their explanation for their response. You want to know who the incumbents are and how they have been relating to these issues in the past and how they intend to relate to them in the future. Take a look at the trends of which questions are least and most popular in general. So not just looking at the candidate access, but also looking at the question axis and how many yeses and nos and maybes each question got. But generally, in comparison to previous years, the questions are getting more and more positive responses and less reluctance from the candidates. So that's really encouraging. And then I'll point out some of the strong responses that you can see afterwards. And of course, all the questionnaires are available for everybody to see online. You can read them at your own pace and learn about the candidates in your neighborhood. So here's an overview of the of how everybody responded to the 6 questions, and you can see all the candidates. It looks like a third candidate may have entered into Ward 2, so we're trying to get the responses from them, and we'll update you as soon as we have that. And then you can see who has not responded, okay, where there's a no response. In general, you can see there's a lot of green on this field. There's some yellows and reds, but and then there's stars for candidates who gave especially good responses for those questions. So just to point out for you to find and follow those candidates. Now, what else do I want to point out? You can see that the housing question is very popular, right? The candidates across the board consider that a no-brainer. The other one that was close was the confinement. Almost every candidate said that they would support prohibiting the sale of products that come from extreme animals in extreme confinement. We're talking about pigs in gestation crates, hens who are laying eggs in battery cages smaller than a sheet of printer paper. We're talking about veal calves, really, really extreme things. So there's a lot of popularity. Also, the animal welfare liaison, another really popular question with only one maybe. So, the candidates sometimes like to caveat their responses, but here's an overview. And then let's just look at the breakdown of candidates by ward. So in Ward 2, we have two candidates, maybe a third. In Ward 3, there are 3 candidates. You can see in Ward 7, that's where the most candidates are, but there's like 13 candidates, I think. And what's happening in Ward 7, Councilmember Vince Gray is retiring. So that's opened up this new field of opportunity, and all the candidates are vying to become the next Ward 7 council member. In Ward 8, we have 6 candidates, 4 of whom responded. Noteworthy absence is Trayon White, who DC Voters for Animals endorsed in his last election in 2020, but who did not respond to this year's candidate questionnaire. And then for the at-large race, we see 4 candidates vying for the Democratic seat of the at-large representative, 2 of whom responded. So let's go into some highlights of how the candidates responded. First off, starting the at-large race, looking at Red Grant, he responded with nice answers to both fur and deer. And fur, he said that it was interesting to me that he pointed out passing for legislation at the federal level and that being an important role. And in deer, just calls it a no-brainer, investing in contraceptive techniques and finding this kind of intersection of humane and sustainable approaches to manage wildlife populations. Couldn't agree more with that. And then what's really nice is when candidates bring their own ideas and creativity. And indeed, he suggested that having a pet initiative on community education and responsible pet ownership, which is a really lovely idea for how to just get the community up to speed on caring for our furry friends. Also in the at-large race, Robert White, he's the chair on the housing committee. And so he pointed to not only him having a bully breed dog in his life, but also thinking about emergency shelters, public housing, private housing. So he's thinking about all of these and says he plans to move forward legislation to prohibit buildings from excluding dogs. So, he is really connecting the dots around housing access and living with our furry friends. Moving on to Ward 8, Armonte Wilson laid out a really clever 7-point plan for animal welfare. I've never seen a candidate lay out anything like that before. It looked really nice. It includes provisions for spay and neuter, laws and enforcement, promoting adoption, which is great, community education, kind of like what Rodney Red Grant was referring to, animal-assisted therapy, and environmental conservation. Loved that 7-point plan. That was really fun to look at and read. And his other responses didn't invite as much passion, but he definitely finished the questionnaire very strong with the 7-point plan. Raman Branch, he wanted to caveat his maybe, and he wanted to see if there was data on how fur sales in the district are harvested in humane processes or via natural deaths. So that's something we could have more conversation around, but there's certainly no animals coming from natural deaths. Animals are bred in the fur industry, or the fur industry breeds animals to be killed for their fur. So they're kept in cages for their life and killed in excruciating ways after living horrible lives. So that's not fun. And really there's no humane practices in the fur industry that I've heard of. And really, animals are being raised for profit. And when these animals are raised for profit, they're going to be raising conditions that maximize profit and minimize that and disregard their well-being. And so that's one of the reasons why the fur industry is considered so cruel. What's interesting though is that he points to animal confinement as his priority, which is a little bit ironic because the fur industry is one of the worst perpetrators of extreme confinement of farm animals, making animals who are typically solitary and used to, like minks, and they're used to living in wide open ranges and not around other animals very much. And then they're in tight cages. Sometimes they're sharing cages and they attack each other because of the stress. And so it's good to see that he does care about animal confinement. Salim Adolfo pointed to an animal welfare liaison as his top priority. Typically, I look at this as not a very strong answer because the liaison is saying that's a priority is kind of like saying none of these issues are a top priority, but it's kind of a catch-all is I guess how I would say it. So that indicates to me that there isn't a lot of passion here. However, Salim Adolfo has been a really strong candidate, not only for Ward 8, but also in building a relationship with DC Voters for Animals. And, that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. Denise Reed wanted to clarify that purchasing of fur should be left to the conscience of the consumer. So essentially have the consumer decide whether or not they wanted to purchase fur and not have intervention from the government to protect these animals. Ebony Payne had some really lovely answers. In regarding to housing access, she spoke about how pets are family and every family should have the dignity of being able to keep their pet with them. In force feeding, she says she's proud to say she's never eaten foie gras as a direct result of seeing behind the scenes videos of horrific force feeding practices. That's absolutely right. And that's exactly the type of attitude we'd hope to encourage, that people react with so many people react with horror to the foie gras industry and know that DC can take action on this. Really nice. She gave a nice open-ended answer on food justice, saying that solving Ward 7's food desert is a top priority. So she did a really good job of kind of connecting food justice, animal protection, and her background with farmers and farmers markets. Also, she shared in the question about any special relationships she's had with animals, that her family has had relationships with, a series of animals. And one that really stands out is rats, and that she's one of the few people who are not afraid of rodents because she grew up holding them as pets. And so often rats and other rodents are seen as pests. And when we can see them as individuals, we can find much more humane and compassionate ways to interact with them and work with them as we try and live in a big, busy city. So really love that response coming from Ebony Payne. Evan Allen really connected the dots nicely in the question around extreme confinement, and talked about how these farms that keep animals in extreme confinement, whether it's the battery cages or the veal calves, they often treat workers extremely terribly as well, and overlook workers. There have been reports of workers on slaughterhouse lines that have to wear diapers because they aren't permitted bathroom breaks. And, it's one of the most dangerous jobs in this country to work on a slaughterhouse line. Workers are often exploited because they're undocumented immigrants and they don't have protections. They don't have the ability to resort to or refer to our government for legal protections. And Evan Allen did a really nice job connecting those dots, and especially recognizing that BIPOC communities are often subject to symptomatic and environmental racism. Also, he says, he caveats his deer response saying, I would support an innovative approach to protecting DMV ecosystems and wildlife that is as humane as it is effective. So he isn't ready to commit to promoting and researching humane interventions yet. He wants to know it's effective, which there is work to be done on its efficacy, but it's not going to happen until we invest in the contraceptive technologies. Looking at Ward 2, Brooke Pinto says that she commits to moving the fur bill forward this year. Is really exciting. That's a keystone bill of DC Voters for Animals platform, and it's been referred to the Judiciary Committee that Brooke Pinto chairs. So it's really great to hear her committing to lead on that. And then also, it seems like extreme confinement is an issue that really stood out to her. And, she wants to weigh the pros and cons of it and what the impact might be for DC as, states like California and Massachusetts have passed laws protecting animals in extreme confinement, and Maryland is considering a cage-free law right now because the battery cages for egg-laying hens are so tiny and they lead such miserable lives. So it's great to see that this is an issue that really stood out to her. So with that, I'd like to open it up to everybody to hear to share about what your views are and how you're thinking about the candidates. And with that, I'll stop recording.